Welcome back to another episode of Freeform AI. My name is Michael. I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. I'm joined by my co-host. His name is
Ben Wilson, and I confuse people at Databricks.
Yes. Today we're speaking about exactly that. It's this odd concept called the Agora. Ben, what the hell have you been up to?
It's a large scale human experiment that I'm running with permission of management. In that, I basically created this place that it's a meeting, like a video call meeting, that anybody on the team can join, and like broadly the global team, anybody can join. And the premise is this is not a lecture series. And what it is we ask some very challenging questions as homework the week leading up to it. And these questions are meant for people to do a little bit of research and see if they can start discovering the underlying thesis of the argument. And everybody takes a little bit of time to write their answers down on a shared sheet. And what's amazing is nobody copies each other. Like each entry that people provide is a completely fresh take on it. And I always start off the sessions with some random historical fact that I think the first time I did it, I think people were very confused and were wondering if I was having like a stroke or something. But then by the end, people realized like, oh shit, that question that you asked at the beginning in the first 10 minutes of discussion that we were having totally relates to what we were thinking about. And after that 10 minutes of intro is done, I just go around the room and pick on people. Just like, hey, tell me what your answer was for the homework. Defend it. And the first couple sessions were like, oh, it's the Ben show. Like I'm asking all the questions, but I'm not giving answers. I'm just asking more questions and getting people to dig a little bit deeper, explore another tunnel of the cave, figure out like what's behind that rock, until all of a sudden people start arguing in a healthy way. They're like, I see your point, but also what about this point as well? And then somebody else chimes in like, I have a different take on this. And the whole idea is that it's almost this democratic guild-like process where everybody's ideas are heard, challenged, and there's no concept of, oh, I'm right, I won the argument. The point is there is no winning the argument. These are nuanced questions that require deep thought and experience. And my theory is that this is the trigger for a lot of people seeing things in a different way. That some of these systems that we build or the concepts that we deal with every day in software engineering, they're far more nuanced and complicated than what most people assume. There's trade-offs everywhere. And they can start seeing parallels between what it is that they do for a living and the rest of the world that they interact with. And this last Friday, I stopped everybody for a moment and I went around the room. Every single person on the call said, name your top hobby. And everybody named stuff. And they're all different, like ranging from very interesting things that people were into, like cerebral research. One person was like, I'm really into Greek philosophy, so I read a lot of Greek philosophy books. Cool. And another person said, I really like playing with cats. Like that brings me joy. Another person was like, I really like knitting. And the principle or the
We have a lot of
thesis of,
nerds on our team. Holy crap.
yeah, some people were like, I'm really into EDM. Cool. And there wasn't any sort of conclusion to any of that. The conclusion was, once everybody was done, to say each of these things that you're interested in, from playing with cats to knitting to EDM music to hiking in national parks, all of these things are systems, and you develop skills in these things, and you're observing your interaction with that. You're processing and analyzing these systems, whether you realize it or not. Our brains do that. And some of these things, some of that reasoning skill that you have while doing hobbies bleeds over into your work. Sometimes you resist it. You're like, oh, work is just cut and dry. It's either right or it's wrong. It doesn't work like that. Apply that same curiosity that you have in your hobbies to work, and all of a sudden things might be more interesting, less boring. And
Yes.
people kind of had like a little bit of a revelation at the end of that. Like, I never thought about it that way. Like, Exactly. Now you're never going to be able to not think of it that way. You are welcome for that rent-free thought that's going to live in your head for the rest of your life.
Yeah, this is a fascinating strategy, and I'm curious, like, just a lot of questions. Starting off, what about this is so entertaining and interesting to you? Because you've spent a lot of time on it, and from what I've seen over the past like years that we've been doing the podcast, your interests have definitely shifted, and it seems like this mentoring concept has really taken the forefront of your professional goals. So, what about it to you is so exciting?
I've discovered over the last year that the thing that I have consistently liked across all of the different industries and jobs, job titles, and things that I've done earlier in my career, I enjoyed those moments of epiphany myself, like understanding finally like how this system works. I remember the first time really grokking the entire primary and secondary system of a nuclear reactor because I was sitting there at a control board and I could see in real time as the throttleman opened up the throttle, more steam in the steam header was being diverted to the engines than me standing electrical operator. I had to like bump the actual governor up to get the generators to be at the proper speed at 60 hertz. And then within 15 seconds of me doing that, I'm predicting, I'm like, reactor temperature is going to go down and the reactor operator is going to shim out the rods. And I'm just like playing, like doing the forecast in real time in my head of like how all these systems work together. And then realizing he's going to have to move to the reactor coolant pumps to fast speed in order to maintain flow rate at that temperature and that rod shim. And I just seeing it all happen and then and predicting it and seeing it, I was like, man, it all makes sense now. It's amazing. Like the books make sense in like the real world. And once you like, not once you, but once I fully understood those systems and had a solid mental model of how everything worked, work became a lot easier and less mysterious. It was like, this is a solved quantity. You can go rabbit holing as far deep as you want into that system and understand like why did they choose this size of bearings for this steam turbine, and why do we choose that viscosity of oil for lubricating those bearings? And you go and look it up in a tech manual and you're like, interesting. I had no idea that they formulated this grease that way. Cool. And you can go pull a spec sheet on that grease and go and look at how the lab actually manufactures it, and like, mystery solved. At a certain point, it's just like, okay, what's next? So popping over to different industries and doing the same thing and having that same revelation about the world is far more complicated than I ever thought it could be. And a lot of people have put in a lot of thought and learnings and failures and making things better and more resilient. And that just always fascinated me. It's like constant novelty, which is, it's like a drug for my brain. Like I've always loved it. But sometime in the last like year or two, I realized that I wasn't getting that from software anymore. I would get interesting things that I would have to go and figure out, or like really complex problems. Like I have no idea how we're going to solve this, but it didn't spark that like, oh, this is so clever or this is so amazing. I think it's just an artifact of like getting a little bit older and no longer feeling that joy. But I noticed that a couple of times I had to explain a design I came up with or an implementation that I did that worked out really well to someone else and see that spark in their eye where they're like, wow, that's really clever. And I'm like, not really. It's just I screwed it up 11 times until I figured this out. But when I noticed that, I almost felt like excitement seeing that happen in another person. I was like, this is even more of a dopamine hit for me than the sensation internally of having a mystery unlocked. And that's what really drove me to this whole like mentoring is kind of cool. Like seeing that dawn in somebody's mind, like you just unlocked a mystery for them.
How do you differentiate mentoring and teaching slash giving the answer? Because before we were kicked off recording, we were talking about this chain of whys and sort of the order of magnitude of the learning you're trying to bestow. And with the Agora, this meeting that you've assembled weekly, a lot of the focus is about teaching people in a very, very deep way. You're not like, this is what a for loop looks like, this is what a list comprehension looks like, or some basic software concept. You're teaching the philosophies that allow them to apply problem solving almost at that base level to anything.
Yes.
Why?
So you teach somebody how to do something, right? Like this is how, or even like the surface level why of why it's not a good idea to do this particular thing. You're teaching them a fact that they can use in that isolated use case. Like, why do we use types in Python? Well, it makes it easier to read, and we can do some amount of type validation during CI and to make sure that we're not going to blow something up. Hopefully, even though in Python your mileage may vary. But if you just focus on factual knowledge like that, you're going to impart valuable tools to people that they know they'll remember that fact for that use case. But if you teach them the underlying reason for why certain things exist, like why is it bad to do a 3 nested for loop? Like, is it bad? Are there cases where we might want to do that? There's nuance there. But why do we try to avoid that? It's usually because it's really hard to reason about. It's really hard to read the code and follow along, unless it is just literally a nesting of 3 things. And at that point, it's like, there's cleaner ways to write that. Like, let's talk about recursion. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's just like more intuitive to look at and be like, all right, I get it. Instead of for this and this, for this and this, for this and this. And all of a sudden you're looking at, well, within the top level of the for loop, there's now 20 layers of if statements, conditionals that need to be evaluated, and a call that needs to be made. And then we start the second for loop. And within that is a bunch of other conditionals and 3 other requests we need to make. And then the final one, we're actually doing the logic. And it's like, all right, my brain now hurts just trying to figure out how the hell this was even built and what it does. But furthermore, what happens when you need to add a feature to that? And what happens if you add it in the wrong place? And the tests don't fail, but it fails in production. It does something super weird that you now no longer can explain. And now you have to waste days like diagnosing that and then refactoring that. And it's like, what if we just try to teach the underlying concept of pursuit of simplicity? And like, why do we harp on that so much instead of going into a PR review and just saying, don't do this. This is hard to read. That's not that useful. But you could take a half an hour and talk to 15 people and explain to them the reasoning behind that. And all of a sudden people are like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. That sounds bad. And they can now extrapolate that to many other patterns.
Yeah, this is a fascinating like problem space. So to put it very structured, your goal is to, in the most efficient way possible, give people intuition about problems. Is that correct?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
And you do this because you like it, which is interesting in and of itself. How have you arrived on this being the methodology for deep learning? Because it sounds like you've probably learned some of these the hard way. I've learned like taking down prod really sucks because then you have to work a lot and it's stressful and you get yelled at. That's enough of a motivation for me to not take down prod now. But more junior people might not have been put in a position where they have enough responsibility to really break a system and then have to unfuck it. So how have you arrived that talking about John Galt, John Frum, and all of the agile software principles, how have you arrived that this is the way to teach in a very deep way?
It's still an experiment. I don't know if it's the most effective way. It just sounds fun to me. It's the way that my mind works with analogies everywhere. And it's probably an artifact of being a latchkey kid in the 1980s with way too many books at my disposal and my parents' home library and way too many VHS tapes of movies that I really shouldn't have been watching at the age that I watched them at. It's this like constant pursuit of curiosity that I can't turn off. I I'm curious about everything. And the only thing that I have to do is regulate that. I used to be really bad at regulating that. I would go down rabbit holes for days on end and not get shit done, or spend like a winter break in northeastern Connecticut just like following trails through encyclopedia set that we had at home. Like, I never knew about that. And I just write that stuff down on a piece of paper and then look up other ones. And I have all these like post-it notes all throughout all these books, pissing my parents off. And it extends to this day of this like insatiable curiosity that I have about, are these patterns transferable? So
Mm.
the way of presenting something that is absolutely just pure distilled absurdism, like asking somebody about John Frum, that's World War II or post World War II historical references in Melanesia. Like the 1% of humans who actually understand that reference are going to hear that instantly and be like, I think I know where you're going with this. The other 99% of people are like, what is wrong with this guy? This is weird. But by the end, they're going to be like, I get it. Like, I really get it. And this is interesting.
Okay, but let me like cut you off with one more question, and then I would love to do a case study if you're down. But
We'll
to
do this week's.
yeah, perfect. So to me, I think you've hit a very interesting and valuable point in that a lot of creativity is about transfer. So I deeply intuit something. Let's take a basic example of being nice. Being nice is important and good because when I was 5 years old on the playground, I took someone's basketball and they cried and it made me feel bad. So from that base intuition, I viscerally feel that. And now I apply that in other areas of life that serve me well. And as I become more of a fully formed adult, let's say, a lot of the intuitions that I have can start serving me in different functions. So whether it be in the workplace, socially, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, a lot of the associations with creativity and genius are that ability to transfer a specific experience to new subjects and new experiences, especially hypothetical ones that have not yet occurred. So
Yes.
I think the fundamental observation that stories and analogies, which often do invoke a very deep, visceral, emotional reaction, are really great ways to teach practical, tangible skills, which is sort of the goal, but also the goal is to create the sources of transfer. Is that a summary?
Yeah, dude, you nailed it. I
Okay.
mean, that's what stories are. Every every story that we've ever told as a species is a way to transfer knowledge by showing patterns.
How did you learn this?
Somewhere around the 5,000 fiction book that I read. I have no idea. It's just something that occurred to me. And it's probably because I don't do genre specific stuff when I consume either literature or films, and even music. If you listen to, like, if you consume entertainment, not purely as distraction, and you consume it in a way that, like, understanding that these are just humans trying to communicate in the medium that they resonate with most, and looking at it as not so much from the thematic element of it, although that has a big part of it, but it's like, what is the message that this person's trying to send? What is the emotion they're trying to convey? That emotion in music could be carefree, jam out. This is summer with the boys, like, or with the girls. Like, this is just, we want to chill, good vibes. Cool. I can appreciate that. Or maybe it's Shostakovich writing insane, like, dissonant resolutions in, symphonic pieces that he wrote. You listen to that and you're hearing the motifs, their development, their mutation over time, and realizing that complexity in music can conjure emotions that people weren't prepared for when they're listening to it. Or literature that can range from, I've got the entire collection of Forgotten Realms books in my library. That's Pulp Fiction. That's like pulp fantasy stuff, Dungeons and Dragons. Read all of them. I've also have books from like ancient Rome and ancient Greece about philosophy. I've got absurdist works from Kurt Vonnegut.
So
And
sorry, how does having so much source content lead to this conclusion? I feel like, yeah, you had a lot to play with, but there must have been one day where you connected ideas in a creative manner and suddenly saw that Roman philosophy applies to how to make the best coffee.
I don't know if there's a connection there. Maybe there is. I haven't thought about it. It could be interesting. But when you get exposed to enough diverse thought, and all of this stuff is thought, whether it's music or it's literature, it's a movie, or it's somebody's ramblings online. It's just a human mind exposing its inner workings to you about decisions that it made and why it might have put that effort into doing that. You start recognizing patterns across everything. It's just, I don't know, my brain just does that now. So coming up with analogies for me is very, very fast, and sometimes maybe insightful, but sometimes it just seems a little absurd. But then once you peel back the layers of the onion, you start seeing like, oh, these are related. That's weird.
Yeah. Okay, final thing before the case study. I also think this way, and I think I've thought this way for a while. And as you were speaking, I was trying to reflect on how, like, the key events that led to me concluding this as well. So, first, the definition of creativity is the cognitive ability to generate original, imaginative ideas and translate them into tangible or intangible realities. I kind of disagree with the translating them into tangible or intangible realities. That feels like more execution, but there is some validity from my perspective to that, and I'm disagreeing with Webster here, so I'm objectively wrong. But there are three core dimensions that are called out: is originality, value and usefulness, and then connection, meaning ideas are connected or synthesized, and that's sort of what we're talking about right now. So I remember hearing a definition like this where connection was central to creativity. And when I was, I don't know, in my teens in high school, I did like 3 years straight of TED Talks because I'm weird. And I remember one TED Talk defined intelligence as the amount of raw information you have at your disposal. So, like memorizing facts. And I think this really stuck with me because at the time I was like, oh, fuck, I wrote memorization is not my forte and still is not. But I thought it was a very interesting point because the more materials you have, the more connections you can make. And that also leads to the conclusion that connections is sort of the basis of a lot of intelligence and creativity. So you made a face. I'm curious what your face is actually saying.
I actually don't agree with that TED Talk at all. I have
Cool.
known
I agree.
way too many people. I definitely won't name names here, but I had students, because I used to teach at that nuclear reactor prototype up in upstate New York. And I would have students assigned to me, usually 10 at a time from every 3-month block of students that came in. So you would have at any time like 30 students, and you're responsible to making sure that they get qualified. And that's not you signing off on every signature in their qual book. And that qual book has thousands of signatures, some representing a 10-minute discussion, some representing an 8-hour long discussion where they're standing at a whiteboard and you're grilling them with questions about like, explain to me how the ship service turbine generator control cabinet works. Walk me through it. I'm an electron coming in from the voltage control cabinet. How do I influence this thing? And they have to draw out the entire thing. And I had students that I could ask them any question in that entire qual book among hundreds of thousands of bits of information that they were required to understand, not memorize, but just understand. And I would have students that would be able to give me almost the textbook answer for every single one of those things. And I could not get them to pass their on-watch quals. They could not respond to a casualty. They didn't understand, like physically when they touch this thing, what that actually does in the system. And I also had students who barely squeaked by with like a 2.81 average. 2.8 out of 4 was the cutoff. Below that, you fail. You fail the entire school. And they would have like a 2.81 on the academic test stuff. And then on watch, first time nailed all of their quals. Like responded to every casualty properly, some in almost record time. I'm like, dang, you've been doing this for years? What the hell? Like, good job. So that's the difference between people that have deep knowledge about stuff, they memorize facts, versus systems thinkers who understand how these things interact with one another. And the only difference there is information compression, in my opinion. The systems thinkers are people that are trying to
Yes.
say, I have absorbed the facts, I read them, they were in my short-term memory, but my mind has compressed all of that into something that can represent the relationships between things. Whereas people that are just devoted purely towards rote memorization, I think their brains just are configured differently to like recall facts accurately. I think both minds are incredibly valuable in the world, like both ways of thinking.
Really?
Yes, there's plenty of jobs where you want that first type of mind working in that.
Name two.
Medicine. You definitely want your doctor to understand a lot of memorized facts.
Sure. All right, name one
You
more.
probably want a little bit of systems thinking in there for diagnostics, but yeah, you'd want that. Lawyers as well would want heavy on that first type. Memorization of legal procedures and precedents.
I don't know, man. I think so. That actually segues really interestingly into how I was thinking about Gen AI a year or two ago, where it did feel like a lot of rote memorization with disparate, unconnected concepts. So when you ask it to apply a concept to a new field, it really struggled. And now with more modern models, we're seeing a lot more quote unquote creativity and critical thinking. I'm super curious if in the next 5 years that value of rote memorization just goes out the window. Because if you think about it, the internet really transformed that value.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think we're going even deeper into that realm where information retrieval is just going to be really easy.
Yeah, and I think that's going to benefit systems thinkers.
Fuck yeah.
Which is why the Agora is doing what it's doing.
Okay, yeah. So I think we've teed it up beautifully. This is why you should care about the Agora in the future. Knowing how to be a critical problem solver, generalize, be creative, use systems thinking to apply concepts to new areas. That's going to be absolutely essential where information retrieval is kind of ubiquitous. So what the hell is this week's assignment?
You tee it up. You read it, man.
Okay. The Slack channel hashtag the Agora at here from Ben. Hey folks, I've given it more than 3 minutes of thought and less than 5 hours of thought. Here is this week's homework. Take about 15 minutes to reflect on these questions. Avoid AI summaries or shortcuts. Go straight to the source material where you can. Question 1. Who is John from? Briefly outline your take on his identity, the cultural persistence of his name, and the core takeaway of his narrative. Question 2. Who is John Galt? Briefly outline his role and persona, why that specific query remains relevant today, and the intended subtext where he is mentioned. Question 3. Select 3 concepts and provide a breakdown. Dry, D-R-Y, solid, S-O-L-I-D, KISS, K-I-S-S, Yagni, Y-A-G-N-I, agile, microservices, no free lunch, move fast and break things, separation of concerns. And for each selection, the actual definition, the reasons for its ubiquity, and the foundational problem it sought to mitigate. All right. Who the hell are these Johns?
John from. Slightly culturally insensitive reference, but it's a fascinating story. So during the buildup and the fight in the Pacific Theater during World War II, the United States flew a lot of military cargo planes to regions of islands in the Pacific where people had not been exposed to technology or modern technology. They were essentially living like fairly primitive lives. And all of a sudden they see a bunch of Navy Seabees show up. Seabees are like construction battalion people. They arrive on an amphibious ship. They land. They have bulldozers. They clear a bunch of jungle space. They flatten out a dirt airstrip. And all of a sudden, airplanes start landing. These airplanes contain food, medicine, supplies, ammunition, weapons, like heavy equipment as well. So the islanders were watching all of this going down and realizing that, hey, we're getting like they're just giving us food and clothing and medicine that's like helping us out, and we're very grateful for this. Well, this thing happened after a couple of years where the war stopped and there was no need to continue to fly freight cargo to the middle of Pacific Islands because the war was over. And basically a religion formed on a number of these islands. And this religion was around this fictional deity called John Frum, and it's spelled Johnfrum. And the sad story around the from part of that is because that's how American service members used to introduce themselves. I'm John from Chicago. John Frum. That became the name. And the deity John Frum would cause a cargo plane to land, provided that all of the conditions that the islanders saw the U.S. service members doing in preparation for planes landing, if they performed those rites, then a plane would land. So they built entire air traffic control towers out of bamboo and flag poles, like windsocks, out of bamboo and palm leaves. They maintained the runways. They had people out there in uniforms made from jungle materials that looked like the flight direction people that were on the runway, like with poles, like waving aircraft into position for takeoff and landing. So semaphore type things. And obviously no planes came, because that's not how any of that stuff works. So this whole term became referred to as cargo culting. And we use that as a software engineering term, like don't cargo cult that. But the whole reason why I'm asking this in the Agora is this is the story behind that term. And once you understand the story behind it, you really realize what that term is actually referring to.
So my takeaway is root cause analysis is important.
Not just root cause analysis. Cargo culting is you're copying something that somebody else does without understanding why they did it. So you're like, Netflix uses microservices, so Netflix is good company, so we must use microservices. It's like, no, Netflix does that because they have something like 17 million requests a second coming into their platform. They need to direct that traffic and handle all of those requests in isolated services because they have 100,000 engineers committing to a code base. You can't have a monolithic deployment architecture like that. It just moves too fast. So every team that owns a service owns their own service. They deploy that on their own, and they maintain compatibility with the other services. That's why those things exist, not because we did it because it was cool. It's like, no, they did it because they had to. So if you copy it without having the same needs, you're cargo culting. You're doing it just because somebody else did it.
Yeah, this is dope, because you could all, like, just building on this theory of teaching via stories. I also deeply resonate with correlation is not causation. And I've felt that firsthand many times in a variety of different ways. But this is a really like fun, tangible example of like people wasting, it sounds like, a lot of time and a lot of energy on correlation, not causation. And without proper assessment of hypothesis testing or whatever your knowledge framework is, you will lead to incorrect conclusions. So, and I'm sure there's like 50 other things. Okay, I'm starting to get bought in. What's the second story? Who is John Galt?
He is a character, a recurring motif character in the book by Ayn Rand entitled Atlas Shrugged. I do not endorse her worldview at all, but I have read the book just so that I can understand her position, where she was coming from. In fact, I think her take on modern society is insanely toxic. But the concept in like her thesis, or one of her theses in that book and some of the other books that she wrote, like The Fountainhead, was basically society in her novel had advanced to a place where there was amazing technological sophistication. Basically, like free energy had been solved. There were like levitating trains and, just crazy technological advancements. And all of this stuff had been built by one man. And then he left. He decided to become a hermit, just left, checked out of society, because his viewpoint was, you haven't earned it. You haven't earned my mind, which is absolutely against everything that I am as a human. That's why I find her work so offensive. But John Galt represents the singular genius. the one who can solve any problem. And it's a myth. And that mentality of what he became is also fairly toxic. So why would I ask, my question to you, why would I ask both of these characters? They're both fictional, but why would we be talking about them of question 3?
Yeah. So question 3 is about a lot of like software engineering principles. So dry is don't repeat yourself. Solid, I don't know. Kiss is keep it simple, stupid. Yagni, you ain't gonna need it. All these concepts are basically pitching simplicity and deep root cause analysis so that you actually solve the problem correctly with the simplest solution. Yay, nay?
I mean, all of these terms are interpreted by people as like, if you do the thesis is, if you don't know the backstory or why to even adhere to any of these principles, you're effectively cargo culting the principles themselves. So that,
God,
and that's
this gets
the lesson.
so meta so fast.
But I mean, that's the whole lesson
Yeah.
of this, is like everybody has used this. I've seen people 6 months out of school who are like, I'm gonna adhere to dry principles. Like, okay, what are those? Like, what does that mean? They're like, well, it's don't repeat yourself. So it's just like, don't have copied code. I'm like, okay, but why? Like, what failure are we trying to prevent there? And it's an insidious one that most people don't realize. That's why product engineers lose their minds over this, because when this breaks, you don't get a failure. You lose trust with your users. And that's the worst failure you can ever have. Exceptions, people deal with those all the time. Faulty software, there's a bug, whatever. But when you have two sources of truth that don't match one another, that's where users are like, well, which one do I use? And we see it everywhere. We see it in accounting systems for like internal measurement of telemetry, where you're like, okay, I go into this system and it tells me that my customer has spent $50,000 this month on our product. And then I go in this other system and it says $67,000. Why are those different?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense sometimes when you look at that and you're like, okay, these are separate services. So separate teams have a different set of like source of truth. Totally understandable. Like, you can't really make a shared, single frame of reference without fixing the data upstream. Understandable. Probably a project that should be worked on, but that's not the dry principle. Dry principle is same system, two different interfaces that give a differing answer. And that's because at some point, somebody had the implementation, somebody copied it of this one function or this one class or something, and they were both in agreement. So nobody notices anything is different. You don't even notice that the code's duplicated. 2 months later, person working on the second implementation, like a new person, goes in and updates that function because they need to make it more correct for this new use case. So they write their unit tests. Unit tests in both the original and this new one are passing. The system builds, it deploys, everything's working, but then the user sees this difference. And the user's like, why is this so broken? That's dry. That's why we do that.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, way easier to have a single source of truth from a cognitive and understanding perspective. It's way easier to fix one bug in one place instead of 7 places.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you are leveraging Gen AI to build out a lot of your code, having it standardized on modules just makes PRs a lot more concise and a lot easier to understand and review. There's so many reasons you should typically be dry. When should you not be dry?
There are cases where you definitely want to make sure that you're not pigeonholing yourself. And that's where you're not talking about the correctness of an output result, but functionality, where in the short or medium term that one of the two end use cases of this is going to need to diverge in some way. And at that point, it's like, if you force dry principles in this case, that now shared abstraction inherits the complexity of the additional feature. And you're just like, well, why did we do this? If you go down that route, but there are answers for all of that. It's like, okay, create a base class, create two separate concrete implementations. Now you can have a shared language, shared way of testing it. And now you have two divergent implementations that make more sense to reason about instead of just, I'm going to copy this module over here. That's just more maintenance burden.
All right. I think this is all making sense. And it's actually answering something that I've been trying to answer for like 3 months now. And I think this is actually personally kind of cool to have this eureka moment. But one thing that I've been really interested and concerned about is sort of like what optimal human thought is in the age of Gen AI. And also compatible with that is I think implementation is becoming easier and easier. I can work on 6 features at once and not sacrifice on quality now, which is kind of cool. And so one of the things that I actually wrote on my to-do list, and it's just been sitting there for like 2 months now, is figure out how I can use LLM-based tooling to get better at the deep work. And I didn't really know what deep work meant, but I knew that like trivial knowledge retrieval and basic execution is no longer super valuable as an employee. And instead, having these big ideas that generate quote unquote value, however you want to define that, is where humans still have a lot of a foothold. And I think the basis of all of that is actually intuition and creativity. Like,
yes,
intuition and creativity will lead to the results that you want. So that's nice. How should I most efficiently go about generating the intuition and creativity? Should I read random books? If so, what and how? I have some thoughts, but I'm curious how you would guide someone on that question.
I think about it as when you're starting out in this way of thinking, and I have yet to meet somebody who is actually interested in hearing me out on this topic, who I explain this to them, where they're just like, yeah, you're full of shit. I don't care. It's usually like, contact me 3 months later and like, help. I followed your advice too well. And I was up till 3 a.m. on Wikipedia. I'm like, excellent. I think of it as you're standing at the entrance to a cave. And I imagine myself as like Virgil in this setup, where the cave is dark and you can't see very far down into it. But as you're going through it, you're passing all of these little passageways on either side. They're all dark too. And that's the exploration of curiosity-driven knowledge acquisition, like pattern matching. The key is to find a cave and walk into it and just start asking why.
Yes. Fuck yes. Like, okay,
what's
cool.
down this? And at the start of it, when people start exploring that, and this happened to me as well, is you don't know when to stop. And to the point, sometimes early on, you might be doing this as part of your work. You're like, I've got a couple of tickets I need to work on, but I'm going to pull a thread here and try to figure out what's going on. And then 6 hours later, you're still spelunking through the source code and seeing what like some crazy dude built for a scheduler system and trying to understand that. And if you don't have a common frame of reference to that, you're just going to start exploring more and more and learning more stuff and being like, why is this a DAG? What is a DAG? 2 hours of Gen AI interface later, you have a pretty solid understanding of what DAGs are. And then you start looking like, why would we make this optional? You start going down that path. Before you know it, your TL is like, hey, are those PRs ready? And you suddenly realize, oh, shit, I haven't even started them. So my advice to people who are starting down that path of figuring out why things are the way they are is bring a can of red spray paint with you. And as you're walking down and trying to find the path to where you need to get so that you understand enough of it, just spray paint a little circle next to each of the little offshoot caves. And what that means is get a notepad and pen and just write down your questions for you to look up later on. If you got those 3 PRs to do, knock those 3 PRs out. Like understand enough to do them correctly. But as you're you're exploring, you're just writing down like, what the hell was Michael thinking here with this design? I don't understand why. Like, I can tell this is elegant. I don't know why. Question mark. And a reference to like a file. And then 5 minutes later of like digging through stuff. What the hell was Ben doing here? I have no idea what the hell this is, but it looks cool. To find out more later. And then after the 3 PRs are filed, that's when you go back to your list and be like, I'm going to see what Michael was up to. And then an hour later, wow, that was clever. I think I understand his thought process here. This is really elegant. And that's how how those connections start being, found. But you can apply it to anything. Apply it to music. It's like, I really like this band or this performer or this composer. Who influenced them? I'm just going to listen to like 15 minutes of their influences. And you start realizing the things that I like about them, the proto version of that were their influences. And then who's influenced by my favorite band? You listen to the next generation picking that stuff up, and you're realizing there's common themes that resonate with people that influence the way that they think and the way that they interpret the reality. And we're all just one great big unbroken chain of webbed relationships to one another and to reality that we've constructed for ourselves. And it starts to make you feel a little uneasy, like an existential crisis mode of like, are we as a species just one continuous mental organism over time? When you start really thinking about it, and like, how do you fit into that?
Yeah.
Can you help shape people in a way? Can you help influence the way that they think so that they're more prosperous? That's what excites me about all this stuff. It's those epiphanies that people are having. You can see their eyes light up. You can get the, wait, hang on, holy shit moments. I live for that. I love seeing that just, it's like a firework going off inside somebody's head when they realize, like, I had never thought of that.
Yeah. It's funny how much this is resonating. I feel like we see this almost exactly the same. Citing some of my examples, I always struggled in school because I never found how the hell it was useful. Like I never really enjoyed knowledge for knowledge's sake. And your comment of just walk into the cave, just solve a problem is how I've operated in a lot of my life. And I've noticed that the things that I learned throughout that process actually stick. Like, I could not tell you a single thing from a single thing in school, but I can tell you a lot about Objective-C, which was how iOS apps used to be written, because for my junior year capstone English paper, I wrote an app. And it just stuck. Like, and granted, it was hell. Like, I learned from a textbook. Like, I literally got an Objective-C textbook and just read the whole thing. But I don't know. I find that so much more compelling and interesting. And then also, if you're motivated by tangible achievement, at the end of the thing, you have a thing. Like, you have an app, or you have a website, or you have, like, with all due respect, an A+ versus an A-. I literally could not care less. But
Same.
A tangible example of achievement, that's very, very valuable in my opinion. But I have one other thing that I've noticed throughout this process. So as you were speaking, I was like, all right, I'm a little worried that I'm not doing things optimally. Let's say I am on a timeline to kick ass and I really want to be as effective ASAP. How would you go about optimizing this process? Because, all right, just enter a cave. Which cave? What do I spray paint? What do I like? When do I leave the cave and go to a new cave? Like, what's like the optimal process to gain the maximum amount of intuition to allow for transfer learning?
Oof. Everything's a cave for me, man. Everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see anything that's not a cave. Tell you a story, man. When I bought this house in Apex, North Carolina, in the Smith Farm,
let's hear this.
In the Smith Farm subdivision. So they took this old farm that was owned by the Smith family that had, I think for like 150 years, they were growing tobacco. North Carolina, shocker. And over time, they they started dialing that down like every other farmer in this region has, because not a lot of people smoke anymore. And they moved to like vegetable growing and cattle raising, like beef cattle. And eventually the family was like, yeah, we're done raising cows. We just want to cash out because somebody's going to give us like $73 million for our property. Well, the neighbor right behind my house, which is on like the edge of the community, was this guy named Bob. And Bob was a farmer. And sometime in like, I think it was like in 1988 or 89, he bought the farm and he started like raising cows. He didn't want to get into tobacco farming. So he actually plowed over all of the tobacco fields and just let them go fallow, and then got himself a couple of head of cattle, started raising them, started learning. And I was out in the backyard one day, like trimming up some just like trees that had died in the boundary between his property, the farm, and my backyard. And the guy just walks up and he's like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "It's going great. How are you doing?" And he's like, I'm Bob. Like, this is my property." I'm like, "Bob, am I intruding on like this boundary here?" He's like, "No, you're doing me a favor, cutting all that dead wood down." I'm like, "Cool. So you don't mind that I keep on doing it?" And he's like, "Please do it." And he's like, "If you're up for it, I got other dead trees over there." I'm like, "I'm good, but thanks for the offer." He kind of laughed. And then I think for most people, that would have been the end of the conversation. Like, "Hey, have a nice day. Nice to finally meet you." But I instantly stopped and I was like, "Hey, Bob, I got a question for you." And he's like, "All right." It's like, "Are there weeds in the field that the cows don't eat?" And this dude's eyes sparked up at first. He was just like, he's like, "Why do you," he's like, "What, you interested in cow farming?" I'm like, "No, no, no." I'm like, "What do you do with the weeds that the cows don't eat? And why don't they eat them?" And he's like, "Well, it upsets their stomachs and they get sick. So they like learn to avoid them, but I go out there and I burn them." And I'm like, "Burn?" So no pesticides. He's like, or herbicides. And he's like, "Well, they, that's not good for the cows." And then I respond with, "It's probably not good for the soil either. That's probably why you burn them." And all of a sudden, this dude looked like, I have found one of my people. We spent 3 hours in my backyard in the scorching August sun, both of us sweat pouring off ourselves, talking about like land management. Do I need to know about land management? I do not. But I knew this dude in 40 years of doing his, like
Mm.
what he does, he knows more than any book I could ever read. And pretty much every Sunday, not every Sunday, but like usually about one Sunday a month, he would be out there and we would just sit and like chat for like an hour. And I would just ask more questions about like, well, how do you manage like what fields to put the cows on at what time? And it's all these questions, because he was a systems thinker. He's a cow farmer, and most people would be like, "Well, it's just a farmer." Like, this dude has more mental nodes about causality and about why he chose to learn the things he did and figure shit out than most humans will ever like build in modern society. And the dude was just a fountain of knowledge that I found insanely fascinating. I learned so much about like just things that are irrelevant to my life, but still fascinated me. And it wasn't until he actually sold his property and was moving out to Arizona to, as he called it, live in a McMansion. And he was laughing about it. Like, he sold it for like $27 million or something.
Holy shit.
I mean, it was like 77 acres of
Wow.
land that he actually told me. He's like, we're always talking about farming, but, and he's like, "You never talk about, your software stuff, or, you mentioned a couple of times some of the engineering stuff you've done in the past." And I was like, "Well, I'm more curious about farming." And he's like, "I just wanted to let my first 22 years out of college, I worked for Boeing as an aerospace engineer." And
Oh,
I'm like,
Bob.
I was like, "Bob, that doesn't surprise me at all."
Yeah.
Like this is just like Farmer Bob is the current manifestation of you, but
Hmm.
you are far more complex as a human being than most people would ever realize. He's like right back at you. So everything is a cave. Every interaction is an opportunity to be like, I always explore. I don't always, sometimes I find that the cave is 3 feet deep and showing like flashing the flashlight around is like, well, that's all that was. But every so often you realize I'm at the precipice of Mammoth Cave and there are so many tunnels down here that it could spend months of my life exploring them. And that's fascinating to me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I don't know that I would be standing for 3 hours in the scorching sun talking about rotating crops, but I hear you. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that everybody has a different why or a different motivation in this process. And I found that the common theme to execution of developing intuition is enjoying it. Like, there's so much science around how if you feel good, creativity is increased, like positive neurochemicals are released, and just stuff is better. And so just enjoy it. Like it's a really nice optimization to focus on of just like being happy. Like if it's creates or like curiosity that floats your boat, if it's results that floats your boat, if it's whatever, it doesn't really matter as long as it's floating your boat. You're going to be working pretty optimally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all right. I think we're about at time. I will summarize. This was cool though. We were just chatting and we were sort of debating on whether we would kick off a recording. We just hit play and here we are. So yeah, anyway, some key points that stood out to me. Intuition is key in a world where information retrieval is ubiquitous. Using stories and analogies to teach is very effective. And then a few tips as you are on your intuition development journey. Some things that can help is just walk into the cave. Don't spend too much time trying to plan, have bias for action. There's going to be a lot of shiny things, especially if you're a curious person. So mark those shiny things for later retrieval and let curiosity drive or whatever floats your boat. And then finally, finding experts is a really great way to augment this. Learning from people who have already figured it out is just a fun way to do it. And often they can distill knowledge in a very concise and effective way. Anything else?
No, nailed it.
Cool.
As always.
Until next time, it's been Michael Burke. I'm my co host.
Ben Wilson.
And have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.